And everyone, my partners, Ian's keeping it real. What's happening, everyone, and welcome to Untitled Boxing Talk. Very happy to have George with Off the Ropes Boxing here with us. Off the Ropes Boxing and MMA. We also got Dave from the Shoe Shine and the hired gun of Al Chile. We got Run PMC. So Sean wasn't able to make it, and Nopal wasn't able to make it this week. And, I think it might be because of the subject matter that we're going to get into. Finally going to get into it. We're going to get into De La Hoya versus Chavez, and Sean came to me. He said, hey, I'm a bit too gringo for this, and I'm just going to pull myself aside. I don't want any business there. That's amongst you guys, and then Nopal, he just told me, he said, bro, it's too soon to be talking about El Gran Campeon. I'm out. And so I was like, you know what? I'm in. Got the homies. No, I'm just kidding. They just couldn't make it. That's all. But we're going to get into it because it's a bit of a touchy subject. And I think it's just an era that a lot of Mexicans just don't really want to talk about. There's a lot of ways to look at it, and we're going to get into it. But first, we're going to go over some news and notes. And yeah, man, let's get right into it. George, Robson Conceição defeats Xavier Martinez. What did you think about this fight, man? And how'd you see it?
Well, welcome. Thank you for having me on again. I appreciate it. Hey, man, this was a really good fight. And then going into it, there really wasn't a lot of buzz for Conceição other than just him trying to avenge his loss against Valdez. So a lot of the promo, of course, was a young fighter, Xavier Martinez. You see it like the commentating, and then later on, as the fight got on, you see them start to big up Robinson Conceição. But as far as the fight, I agreed with the win. I feel like the only round I think that Conceição lost was the third round where he did get rocked. It was good to see him get his composure back. He did really well. I love the way he boxed from the outside, jab, had to get dirty when it was time to get dirty, good footwork. And I feel like sky's the limit, man, for him here. And I know he's looking to try to get that loss back against from Oscar Valdez, but we know Oscar Valdez has a fight possibly in April against Shakur. So, I feel like everybody kind of feels that Shakur is the slight favorite. So who knows? He might not be able to get that rematch right away. Maybe something later on in the year. But if you look at the division, I know one fight that I did show interest in was the Roger Gutierrez and Chris Colbert. And that one's happening, I believe, at the end of this month of February. I mean, that would be a pretty cool fight to see him stay busy with. But other than that, man, Conceição did really well. I was happy to see him get that win.
I agree. I mean, I think Conceição clearly won the fight. I mean, I don't think I had it. I mean, I didn't really score it on an actual scorecard, but I think I had it probably a little bit closer, anywhere between like a 9-3, 8-4. Because I think Martinez wasn't getting credit for some of the shots he was blocking and some of those more quiet rounds. But I think Conceição has definitely has the ability, but it just seems like they were touching on a little later in the broadcast was like, does he have that extra gear to give in some of those championship rounds that he'll need to give against the top guys? I mean, we saw against Valdez, they had a great showing, but there is some truth to what Tim Bradley says, even though I think he over exaggerates it when says that Conceição doesn't really have the fire to finish and stuff. I mean, I think he's a great boxer. Sometimes you see with those guys that have such a deep amateur background that sometimes they're looking to win the round opposed to like clearly win the round. But I think he's definitely a player in the weight division. As for Xavier Martinez, I mean, I don't know. I mean, sometimes you see some with the TMT guys or ex-TMT guys, we don't know if they're brought in to be opponents or we don't know if they're brought in to actually be the winner. But it seemed like probably just some time out of the ring and not being as inactive in his early career, or not being as active in his early career might be showing. And you see sometimes some of the guys, they have to be tested, and Top Rank are good matchmakers, and sometimes they put them in tough early. And I think that's what happened. I don't think it's the complete end of for Martinez, but I think he definitely needs to make some changes if he wants to get to the next level.
And what'd you think, Dave?
I was definitely impressed by Robson Conceição again. Absolutely, that rematch is on my mind versus Oscar Valdez. where I think he was robbed in a very close fight. To be honest, looking back at that, I think he edged it. We talked about it last night. There was that controversial referee call over the punch into the rear of the head, where I thought, had that not been there, possibly, he should have edged it. But also Xavier Martinez was the guy, like I was saying last night on my show, The Shoe Shine. I've been watching him closely coming up the ranks on TMT, watching him on Show Sports Friday nights. And it was a prospect that I had really high hopes from. His close ties to me here in the Bay Area, Sacramento cat, his relationship with Diego Corrales, the late Diego Corrales. I had high hopes for him. That when I heard that he was moving to Top Rank, I was ecstatic for him, but I was also very curious what's going on at TMT. A lot of us have been speculating what's going on over there with their roster. And I thought that throwing him in with Robson Conceicao was going to be a real test. But as it turns out, I had tweeted, I don't think he was ready for this test against the Brazilian gold medalist. I don't think he was ready at all. And part of that is because of the soft opposition he was facing on Showtime Sports. So where does he go from here? He goes to the back of the line again. This was the WBC title eliminator. So for Robson Conceicao, I think he's on a collision course eventually with Shakur Stevenson, because I'm not entirely sold that Oscar Valdez, as much as I like him, is going to get past Shakur Stevenson this spring.
Man, well, I resonate with a lot of that. And I want to give some shout outs to people in the chat. JC, first up in the house. Thanks for joining us, brother. Nando Yamas is here, and he says, neither guy was impressive. Xavier Martinez should retire. He looked plodding and disinterested. Damn. And D-Styles here. Thank you so much. Pound for Pound Boxing Real News. Subscribe to him, y'all. He's here too. And he has to say, earlier I thought they had close rounds, but the second half of the fight was clear. Robson won easily. And then Remy's in the house. So, hey, and we're glad that you're all here. And, I resonate with a lot of that too. Like I had Conceicao winning that first Valdez fight. Well, the only Valdez fight. I had him winning that fight. And, this fight kind of snuck up on me. We didn't even really cover it on the last El Chile. And I knew Conceicao was fighting, but I didn't register who the opponent was. And through quality HCP programming, I actually knew who Xavier Martinez was. And, dude, I was a little bit surprised that Conceicao was the underdog. And I couldn't believe it when I saw the odds, right? I'm like, to me, I think that Conceicao, he had a higher pedigree. And I felt like Xavier Martinez had some work to do. He kind of felt like, I don't know how to put it. Like, I don't want to insult the dude, because I appreciate everybody who gets up high, and kind of works their way towards becoming a professional boxer. But he kind of seemed like club level to me, like local favorite type guy. Like that's the vibe I always got off of him. So I was surprised. And then some people were like, well, I think Xavier Martinez is going to win, but I didn't see it that way, And so, I put down a little bit of money. This is a thing that people are doing right now. They're showing their bets online. So I don't know if this is called like a flex. Got to bet 3 hundo, 3 Benjamins. Right. Nice. When I saw the odds, but I mean, I don't really know what this proves. I mean, I could be maybe only showing you the fights that I do win. Right. I mean, for all anybody knows, this could possibly be my car payment that I'm betting. So I don't know. I don't know if I like it, but
double your money.
Shit. But that just goes to show how confident I was about this, and I don't know, I'm also from the Bay Area. I spent some time closer to Sacramento. So I'm a NorCal type dude, and it's like, I don't know, sometimes I think Northern Californians, we could be wishful thinkers, I used to always have Sacramento Kings fans bet against Lakers fans. Whenever the Kings had a little something going, Lakers fans would be like, oh, you want to take an even money bet? Like, oh, okay. And usually it worked out for the Lakers fan. And I kind of thought there was a little bit of, I don't know, some kind of bias, I think, because Xavier Martinez, I thought he wasn't ready. And I'm glad I cleaned up on it. Does anybody have any final thoughts on that before we move out to the next subject?
I do. Xavier Martinez had been very fortunate in his performances on Showtime to have significant power advantage. And the one time that he did rock Robson Conceicao, he wasn't able to capitalize on that going forward. I think that would have been his sole chance right there. Yesterday, our good friend Sonteo Media had reminded me that Louis Correa, a fighter for Robert Garcia, had put down Robson Conceicao to the floor. So I think today, coming Monday morning, Xavier Martinez is probably kicking himself, wondering why he didn't capitalize further, because he does have a power advantage there. And going forward, he's going to have to step it up when he gets people in danger. This was his one chance to get himself into title contention, and he's probably kicking himself. And going forward, hopefully, you know, with this large roster of talent at 130 at Top Rank, he'll capitalize to use his power advantage. Also, you're just reminding me, man, as you know, as a San Jose guy, whether it's Andy Vences, who fights at 130 pounds, who's come up short on Top Rank, and now we have from Sacramento, we have Xavier Martinez at Top Rank, and Gabe Flores coming up. Gabe Flores getting battered recently, who'll be fighting now in March in Fresno. I hope that the Bay Area can turn it around, because all those three cats are kind of local to us in Northern California, and they're all on the Top Rank roster.
Oh, yeah, Dave, remember when we had Robert Guerrero and Andre Ward kind of, you know, near the top of their divisions at the same time? That was a pretty sweet little era for us.
Those were the good days.
Definitely the good days. All right, man. Well, let's get to our next subject. As you all heard, it looks like it's official, man. Tyson Fury versus Dillian White. So, Rylan, what do you think about this? It's finally been made. I want to know what you think about this fight stylistically now that it's officially been made. Are you happy about it happening? Like, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm happy that it's finally happening, so we don't have to hear about Dillian White being the mandatory as we have for the last, I don't know how many months and years. But I think this is going to be an easy win for Fury. I've never been high on Dillian White, and for I don't know, I just had never been high on him. I mean, his claim to fame is knocking down and beating Anthony Joshua in the amateurs, which he did, which was a great win. But that's the amateurs. I haven't been high on him in the pros. I mean, he's had decent wins against older guys. I thought he lost against Oscar Rivas, who's the Bridgerweight champion now for the WBC. I think Oscar Rivas, if anything, should be in this title slot, because he won that fight, and Dillian White cheated in multiple ways, whether if it's regarding the gloves or the drug test. I know the B sample came back clean, but it's just odd to me. But I'm glad the fight's happening. It's definitely going to be I'm still going to watch the fight, of course. It's going to be a great, entertaining fight. I hope Dillian White just goes for the kill and just goes out swinging. But I think Tyson Fury is going to win easy.
Yeah, I agree too with you, Run. On paper, of course, we look at it, right? You're just like, well, who's the favorite? Tyson Fury is obviously the favorite out of the two. You know, you had Bob Arum make a comment saying that Dillian White is more dangerous than Deontay Wilder. I wouldn't say punching power. I would say maybe punching power plus a little bit better boxing overall. I mean, his stamina might not be the best as well, but I feel like he has a little bit better stamina than Wilder. So, like, if he was to get Tyson Fury hurt, it would be actually a pretty interesting fight to see what really happens. I mean, it all depends too what Tyson Fury comes into this fight. Will it be the second Deontay Wilder? Will it be the third Deontay Wilder? Or he just trains particularly for this Dillian White? I'm with you on that as well. That I'm glad this is finally getting made, because that's what was pretty much in the boxing news. You know, turning down money, accepting money. This guy should be in there. This guy should be the mandatory. But all in all, I'm pretty excited this is actually made, so that way we can go ahead and move forward and start moving some of the guys up in the division.
All right, David, I know you spoke a little bit about this on your show. I liked your take, man. Tell us, what do you think about this fight?
You know what's resonating with me regarding the Dillian White fight? I wasn't like too keen on it or excited about it, but for us boxing purist fans who are like always upset at the sanctioning bodies, this bodes well that we're finally like going by the rules. Like, this guy's been waiting for ages for his title shot, right? As a mandatory. And oftentimes we see the sanctioning bodies and the fighters who are the A side skirt everything they're supposed to be doing. You know, like sometimes we see things where people are waiting for years, like in the case of Dillian White. I'm not that terribly excited about it. Dillian White does have some notable wins over Derek Chisora, Joseph Parker, Alexander Povetkin. So I know that Drew Evo, my co-host, is always high on Tyson Fury, but Tyson Fury better prepare for this fight. He better not take Dillian White lightly. We've seen him when he takes fighters lightly, and he got banged up pretty hard and his eye cut when he did take that one fighter lightly. And I forget the guy's name. If you guys want to help me out with that guy, when he fought in Vegas, he got his eye ripped up. Seems he took that
Otto
fighter.
Wallin.
Yeah, Otto Wallin.
Otto Wallin, exactly. That was a real time that recently I can remember that it looked like Tyson Fury barely prepared. He had plenty of time in this rematch, and what to me was fight of the year in 2021 versus Deontay Wilder. So I do see Tyson Fury well prepared, beating Dillian White easily.
All right. And I want to give a shout out to Team Batman Boxing who's joined us. Thank you so much, man. And Nando says here that there's no sure things in the heavyweight division, and that's why it's fun. You know, now that this fight's being made, I like it for a couple reasons. One, you know, I like the stylistic matchup a bit. I think this is a different type of fight. Like, I would rather have this fight than like a fourth Deontay Wilder fight. I think Tyson Fury is going to handle Dillian White, but I like the matchup. To me, it'll show kind of what I call Tyson Fury's like inside, like back alley type fighting skills. It's going to be like a grueling matchup, you know, with ultimately, I think Fury dominating, but you never know, you know. And plus, you know, there's a part of me that I like seeing Dillian White like get beat up on. There's something about him that I just want to see him get his ass kicked. So kind of looking forward to that too. Also, you know, not that it matters to me because Tyson Fury is the man. I think that his resume is more important, but it's like you said, Dave, you know, some people, they think that Tyson Fury's resume is a bit thin. And it's like, well, you know, this would be a great one of those like mid-level guys that people give so much credit to. So if you get this dude under your belt, I think it's great. On top of that too, like we're going to get this fight in April. Like that's not even that far away. We could have easily seen Fury fight only once if businesses between like, you know, who knows, like Top Rank and Eddie Hearn just didn't work out. We could have been just waiting for any type of fight to pop off. So the fact that we're getting this one in a few months, I think is great.
Yeah, and it is a good fight for the UK. Shoeshine, I agree with that 100%. They're, you know, the two guys, I mean, I would say three, Fury, Joshua, and White. They're like the big guys in the UK. And, you know, the UK fans, they love their fighters no matter win, lose, or draw. Like, they support them 100%.
Oh, yeah, man. So we all have that to look forward to. So, dude, let's get into our next subject. Those are our news and notes, you know, and yeah, if y'all want to catch, like, I guess, like, you know, we could get, you know, everybody's quick opinion on the Makabu fight because, hell, if Canelo mentions your name, you're famous, and all of a sudden some shitty Don King pay-per-view was what everybody's trying to watch one way or the other, right? So let's just do it real quick. I just want to go through the panel and just see what your initial take was on that. George, what'd you think about that fight, brother?
We just did we did the episode a little bit on this. We touched on it yesterday. Makabu. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the only reason Canelo wasn't the one that actually called him out. It was obviously Reynoso mentioning that that he would fight him obviously because of the WBC and they're both being franchised and that would be a bout that they could go for. But watching the fight, man, I mean, shit, it looked like it was done in a musical band room in elementary school. The quality wasn't that great. And if they were to make this fight, I mean, who's going to put up the money to bring Canelo in? I mean, I don't know. But as far as the overall fight, I thought he lost. I probably gave him maybe 2 rounds, 3 rounds in that whole fight. I think it was like the 8th and the 4th round, and maybe Machunu showed. I mean, obviously he's not a Canelo type of fighter, they possess the same skill, but he showed, you know, you can outbox Machunu. And if you were to implement Canelo body punching, a better jab, I mean, that fight goes not even halfway through the fight. That'll end pretty early for Makabu. And Makabu was losing that first fight against Machunu as well until he got knocked out in, I think, in the 10th or 11th round. And he was obviously getting outboxed there. So I was not impressed whatsoever.
I didn't score it round for round, but I think Machunu clearly won. I wasn't impressed with Makabu. I have been impressed with Machunu in the past. The first fight, or I guess really the only fight besides the first fight against Makabu that I saw Machunu fight was when he fought Eddie Chambers when they used to have those NBC sports cards. This was back in probably 2014. But yeah, and he worked Eddie Chambers. He made Eddie Chambers look slow in that fight, in my opinion. And I just don't see how Canelo could bring Makabu in as an opponent. I mean, I don't think Don King's going to be able to front the money. I mean, Don King's still kicking, but I don't think he has as deep of pockets as he did in the late 80s, early 90s, and even the 70s. So we'll see. We'll see where Canelo goes. I would much rather see Canelo fight someone that's like a Charlo or at least someone else, just anyone but Makabu at this point for me. But Yeah, it was an odd venue too. I remember I went on Google Earth like a few days before the fight. I'm like, this looks like they're at a community center in like rural Ohio, and it was just an odd thing. And I know Don King was he used to have the Don King training camp in Ohio because he's from Cleveland, but it was just an odd sort of thing. And then obviously you see Don King still has some power over like certain boxing commissions able to get this fight, and now they're pushing like Dave and Drew mentioned on their show last night. They're really going full bore with the media trying to push for this Canelo fight, like saying Canelo needs to be a man of his word. It's like not after that performance, you lost. So we'll see where it goes. I'm just hoping Canelo fights someone, but that's not Makabu coming May.
Hey, man, I agree with everything y'all had to say. I didn't score it either, Run, but from what I saw, Makabu lost that fight, and it was kind of boring. Like, you know, it's still a championship fight out in the middle of nowhere. Like, to me, I felt like they were both just, like, not really pushing the issue a bit. Like, they were both comfortable with just kind of being slow and plodding. Like, I really didn't see too much there, but and I do think Canelo would beat Makabu, but I've always said, like, I don't have any interest in seeing Canelo move up to cruiserweight. Like, to me, I just think that's too big of a jump for anybody at 168 pounds right now. So, I mean, yeah, I understand that Canelo's skill might offset maybe what Makabu just naturally brings to the table with his just natural strength and size, but it is kind of a relief. And plus that fight never really excited me. I like the Charlo fight, so it looks like there's green lights there all around, man. So does anybody have anything to add before we move on to our next subject?
I guess Mike Coppinger wasn't wrong.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Dave, did you anybody else have anything that they want to add?
Well, yeah, I wanted to say after watching that Makabu fight, and you guys all touched upon the poor production values, including the site appeared to be a large gym or high school gymnasium of some sort, community center. It was awful production wise, and the fight itself wasn't something that I could argue could be a main event on any of the top promotional companies. So it's going to be an incredibly hard sell to get the casual fan even interested in this if they can go on YouTube as easily as I did hours after that pay-per-view and watch it, that this guy is fodder for Canelo Alvarez. And also, like, does Canelo really want to hurt his body moving all the way up in weight when all the big fights are going to be back down at light heavyweight and still some good fights at super middleweight where he's the unified, undisputed champion? I don't think it's worth his effort to collect this paper. It's not a paper belt. It's a legitimate WBC title. But Makabu is clearly the weakest link. I'm convinced of that now. Okoli would knock him out in a few rounds, and I think Brady's would actually probably knock him out as well. I think those guys need to get it on and figure out who the new cruiserweight unified champ is, like Usyk did. That's what I think they need to do at cruiserweight. But guys, also there was some hilarity this weekend because this guy Brady's released his own diss hip hop track at Jake Paul. He's really gunning to fight Jake Paul, and I think it's Makabu. Makabu clearly wants to sell his title to Canelo Alvarez after he saw that, Caleb Plant got $10 million selling his title to Canelo. Makabu wants to sell his title too for a record payday. And I don't think it's going to happen. I think he should start targeting Jake Paul if he wants to sell a title, because he doesn't look too far fetched from the talent level that Jake Paul is providing.
Absolutely right. Yeah, man. And didn't he get like a fake tattoo on his leg too?
He did.
Or was that real?
I don't know. It looked real. He's saying, look, I got a tattoo. He's gunning for that Jake Paul, money, because there is a lot of money in fighting Jake Paul.
Damn, that's one hell of a theory. It didn't really cross my mind, man. That's actually, as far as hell, why not? I mean, it is a sad state of affairs when, somebody like that is called a champion. I don't know. I mean, cruiserweight, I've never really cared that much about cruiserweight in general. No offense to the cruiserweights, but I mean, it's not a division that a lot of people know about that much. Like, nobody really talks about it. Like, a lot of people didn't even really know who Makabu was. The hardcores did, but I mean, otherwise, I mean, you have to really love boxing. Like I said, I think he was only covered because Canelo's name is attached to Makabu. And I totally agree with the production value. It felt like I was watching some kind of like mid-90s pay-per-view. Which in a way was kind of fun, like a little bit like retro. I mean, I didn't pay for it, so I mean, I really don't have much room to complain.
Yeah, I don't think I didn't pay for it. And I thought the same thing too. I watched it like an hour or so after on YouTube. And when I was watching, I'm like, is this a rerun or what the hell am I watching? Is this like happening? Because they showed the Trinidad, I think like 2 fights before it. It was like an old fight. I don't remember which Trinidad fight it was. I remember just backing out of it and trying to find it, and then I fast forwarded a little bit, and then there it was towards the end of the video. But it was poor quality, man. And you know, yeah, I don't think Canelo should waste his time on trying to fight Makabu. There's handsome names out there, man. You know, out there for him to go after. We all know the names he's calling for, so let's make those happen.
Oh, yeah. All right, fellas. Well, we got the news and notes out of the way, so it's time. We're going to talk about it, man. It's something that Mexicans just don't ever seem to talk about. We just want to act like it never happened, you know, but I think it's time that we go and revisit it because there's a documentary film that's coming out, The Civil War. It's the fight between the great Julio Cesar Chavez and the great Oscar De La Hoya. Some people could call it like a passing of the torch. You know, there was like some tension going on back in the day, you know, and a lot of us have memories of this fight. Like we were as squinklers back then, very young. And well, let's just pass it around. If you have any memories about what you remember about this fight, I mean, we were all young, but I mean, hell, you know, we probably had some family that was into the idea of this fight, and people had some very strong feelings about it. So George, like when you were young and this fight was popping off, like what do you remember?
I was probably about 12 or 13. And of course, me being Mexican, you know, my parents, but my dad actually from Mexico. So you obviously know whose side he was on. He was a big fan of Chavez, and of course that made me a big fan of Chavez growing up watching boxing with my dad. But there was definitely divided, man. You had, of course, you know, the Mexicans and the Chicanos, and it was legit. Like there was fist fights, not in my family, but you hear stories about it. Like one of the guys on my work, we're talking about this video that you know documentary coming out, and he was like, I was actually at both those fights in Caesar's Palace. And you couldn't claim you're going for De La Hoya. You couldn't claim you're going for Chavez because like physical fights were actually happening in the stands even after. As soon as that fight was over, like you had to get the hell out of there. I heard there was even like other sheriff's departments other than Vegas that were there. That's what he was telling me. But as far as those fights I'm remembering, I was actually just rewatching those again. I mean, dude, a young De La Hoya, like I think people need to go back and watch some of his fights again and see how good of a fighter he really was. And he wasn't just one-handed. He was a left-handed fighter fighting right-handed, so he had a good right hand as well. So first fight, I remember cut over his eye. There was a controversy: did Chavez come in with the cut over his eye? He got cut within like a minute of the first round, and then after that, you saw blood, and he just couldn't finish it, man. But those were some good times, and in the second fight, you can definitely see that it was more personal for De La Hoya, and he was determined to get that. I don't know if he wanted the torch passed to him or not, or whatever he was looking for, but he definitely, you know, dominated, and he became the new guy for that division and the new Mexican American, I should say.
While we have a little bit of a break, I just want to go over just what their resumes look like at the time, because I think it kind of puts a little bit of context. Like, you know, so, you know, all of us are generally around the same age, so we have memories of this. But, you know, it occurs to me that there are some people that just are obviously younger fans and might not even remember that era and just what a big deal it was. And so, hell, you know, it's like Nando said, man, you know, this was some closed circuit stuff, you know what I mean? And I ended up watching that fight myself. My dad took me to see it closed circuit at the Arco Arena. And dude, just like George says, man, dude, afterwards there were fights total. Like there was probably like my dad's like, we got to get out of here. There was, you know, probably like from what I remember, like 4 different things going on, you know, and who knows, it could have just been people getting hot. Maybe people were making bets with each other in an arena, which I think would be just a completely foolish thing to do. And then, you know, if the fight ends off a cut, you know, and there's already strong feelings anyways, I mean, who knows how that could end up, you know, but I just want to take a look at this particular little slide right here. So this one touches on what Chavez Sr. had going on. All right. So he had just had a majority draw with Pernell Whitaker. Right. And then he gets some fights, and then he fights Frankie Randle, which was his first loss on paper. Okay. And it was a split decision. And there was some controversy there just a little bit because, well, Chavez was docked points for low blows, but And that's one of the reasons that one dude gets booed all the time. That ref, that's one of the two. I think I forget that referee's name, but he always gets booed back in the day. But that's one of the two fights. And then also I think it was another De La Hoya fight that he stopped. It was the Meldrick Taylor fight, the first one, when he was like, "Oh, are you ready?" Nope, nope. So he was getting booed. So he had some controversy. But if you see here, like a lot of people don't talk about the fact that Chavez rematched Frankie Randle immediately. So I watched the rematch. And because I wanted to see if perhaps maybe they gave him this decision, to kind of keep him the champ. And you got to understand that, with Pernell Whitaker, Chavez moved up to 140 pounds and then fought at a catch weight against Whitaker, had the draw, then went back down to be the lightweight champion, the WBC lightweight champion, and defend. And so then he ended up beating Frankie Randle. I watched the fight. I thought it was a bit of a draw, but it was weird that in the last round, it got cut short again because Chavez was starting to cut a lot by this time, and he was a little bit older.
Mhm.
And the rule is if it's a inadvertent headbutt, -1 point. So Chavez won that round, in my opinion, and then he got cut, and then Frankie Randle got docked a point, okay? And then they had to score that round. So what the record shows is that if they hadn't have deducted a point with the scorecards, it would have been a draw. But Chavez did come back. So on paper, he's only got one loss, and then he fights Meldrick Taylor again, right? Fights Tony the Tiger Lopez. And then in 96, he goes on to fight Oscar De La Hoya, who's moving up in weight. And this is his first step up, right? So he'd fought once at 130 and then ended up fighting the great Julio Cesar Chavez, and kind of what was like a passing of the torch, very heated at the time. And then this shows what happened between the first and the second fight. So Oscar De La Hoya in 96 fought Chavez. And then after that, Chavez pulls off a string of wins, right? And then I watched this split decision against Miguel Angel Gonzalez. Some people don't talk about it, but I mean, if you look at the comments, like the YouTube comments for that particular fight, a lot of people think that one was kind of a gift draw decision for Chavez. Like to me, it looked kind of even. It looked like Chavez was coming on. I didn't finish it, and nobody's really talking about it. But I think maybe some people just don't ever really want to talk about this in general. So we're going to get into the matchup itself, and then also I just want to go over what De La Hoya had going on. So in between the fights, like you could see that he's on a tear. He's young. He's moving up in weight, and then after the Chavez fight, he goes and fights Pernell Whitaker. We scored that one. He went up to 140, right? And then when he fights Chavez again in 98, it's for the world welter title, right? Actually, the Pernell Whitaker fight looks like it was a welterweight fight. So, I mean, De La Hoya was maybe even more in his prime. Like, I think that the best De La Hoya is 147 De La Hoya, but that's just me, and I know Run PMC has some strong feelings about that too, but I just want to pass it around a little bit and see what you guys think about the circumstances and about the fight itself. Run PMC, what do you think about everything I've had to say, brother?
I agree with a lot of it. I mean, De La Hoya coming into this, I mean, being completely honest, for the first fight, I was much too young to even remember anything about the first fight. But as I was touching on when we were talking before the show started, my grandfather used to work for a cable company, used to get discounted prices and sometimes free pay-per-views. And I remember for the second fight, at least, was that when what I heard from my family was that, like, surprisingly, a lot of people in my family did like Oscar De La Hoya just because his skill set and what he brought to the table. But what I did hear was that a lot of people didn't like that. They thought the first fight was somewhat lucky because Chavez got cut and he just wasn't the same after that. Whereas, I mean, looking back on it, I mean, but he did get cut, but at the same time he did quit in that first fight. I mean, whether it's for his own safety or well-being or not, that even if you do quit, that is something that does happen. But as we see, like looking back, like historically now, Chavez was at the end of his career, sort of with this. I mean, he did have quite a few fights after these fights, but it was sort of towards the end. And Oscar De La Hoya, I agree with Chicano that his prime was in those 140 when he was at 147. Like just the mix of he was able to show his athleticism, he was able to utilize his reach while maintaining his speed and being, like they say, like an inverted conventional fighter, meaning his strong hand, his natural like strong hand is his left hand, and having pop in that jab, his jab was, I mean, that has to be one of the best jabs in the game, at least at that point in time, because it was just getting out there. He could double, triple up at times, and then eventually when he added like Floyd Mayweather to the arsenal, he was able to use the jab a lot more. I didn't really agree with on the defense, but Oscar looked really good in both these fights that I rewatched yesterday. Just the way he was able to rattle off combinations, the punch variety. He was changing up the speeds on his punches, but then just the blistering combinations like that. He would either, like, I forgot which fight it was, but he like landed an uppercut, and I think it was a left uppercut, a lead left uppercut, and then just finishing up Chavez from there. And it was quite impressive, especially at such a young age. And this is relatively young in De La Hoya's career, being coming out of the Olympics in '92, and then the first fight with Chavez being less than 4 years later. That's really impressive to really dismantle a legend at within less than a quadrennial since you were in the Olympics. Quite impressive.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, great stuff, Ron. I just want to point out that at the time, Chavez only had one loss on paper, right? He was the defending champion and only 33 years old during their first fight. But a lot of people remember it like, man, Chavez was just straight washed. But I mean, at the time, this was a step-up fight for De La Hoya, and he wasn't that big of a favorite. It was 3-1. Then more money came in on Chavez, ended up making him 2-1. So, Shoeshine, Dave from the 408. Please, dude, tell us what you remember. Like, do you have any memories of this? Like when it popped off, like what was going on with your family at the time? Like,
oh
was
shit,
it
you guys
for you?
Are you guys ready? Are you guys ready for
Hell
this?
Yeah, man. I want to hear it.
To be honest, if I had to film a movie of my life, this would have been one of the most profound scenes in my movie. I've referenced that I was born and raised in San Francisco, but I would have been about 18 years old in 1996, and this was the summer that my mother decided it was time for me to meet my biological father. So we took the trip down to Morelia, the capital of Michoacan, to meet my biological father, who I had zero contact with up until, I just turned an adult. The plan was to meet him and spend the weekend or a week in Morelia, Michoacan, where my father was probably the most successful jaripeo promoter. For people who don't know what jaripeo is, it's Mexican rodeo. It's integral into the culture and lifestyle. And my biological father was actually a well-known bullfighter in his youth. So about as far removed as what Dave from the 408 was actually who he was at 18 years old. I was a rave DJ, a successful rave DJ at 18, already working my ways into the club circuits, crazy hair, crazy looks, crazy fashion. Late 90s, 96 was beginning of the late 90s, and just completely removed from what real Mexican men are supposed to be. So going back into the history of that era, man, we still had a lot of issues, and we still do to this day. What does it mean to be Mexican when you're Mexican American? What's a pocho? Who's a real Mexican? And here I was meeting probably the most realist Mexican man I had ever met, and it was my father. And the only thing I could think about was I going to meet his expectations? So that meeting didn't go how I imagined it to be. And it ended up being quite a depressing experience in my life, not being able to fill his shoes or meet his expectations or to build upon a relationship. But actually, it was exactly what was going on during that fight. And on that trip where I got to see his ranches, I got to see what my uncles did for a living, straight up cowboys, horse riding, breeding bulls, working the farm, everything Dave from the 408 was not. And it culminated when he said, we're going to go see Chavez and Oscar De La Hoya on June in 1996. And I saw that at a stadium in Morelia, Michoacan, which would have been an arena, much like somewhere you'd go and watch a basketball event. And I got to tell you guys, being there as a Mexican American, pretending to be Mexican because, you want to keep your profile low, there wasn't a single happy person in that event in Morelia, Michoacan, man. As the crowd was wowed. I mean, they were just, their jaws were dropping that this young Chicano, fake Mexican from Southern California was beating their ultimate Mexican champion, the greatest Mexican boxer they had seen in recent history. And historically, they couldn't believe it. They absolutely couldn't believe it. And there was a look that my biological father gave me, almost like blaming me, like these Mexican, like fake Mexicans, Mexican Americans. It didn't go how the audience had expected this fight to go. And my personal experience, it didn't go, with my father, it didn't go exactly how I thought it would go either, man. So this fight for me as a casual boxing fan, because I was just a casual boxing fan then, it was forever embedded in my memory for the rest of my life.
Wow, dude, that was great story, Dave. Thank you so much, man. Yeah, dude, like I think it's kind of like one of those like where were you when it happened? As long as you have like some history with boxing, and that's one hell of a cool story. And on top of that too, like don't let it ever be forgotten that the cowboy, that's all Mexican shit. And I just want to lay that out. There's history books on it, like hey man, there's a lot of tricks and a lot of ways like the saddle was made, and just from everything. A lot of it originates from Mexico, Mexicans learning how to be cowboys, when it wasn't so glorious, right? And
Oh
they're
yeah,
doing
to
it
this
sorry, go
to
ahead.
this day, like he right to currently, I mean, one of my favorite fighters is El Vaquero Navarrete. He's very proud to call himself El Vaquero.
Oh yes.
Hell yeah. And the thing I want to talk about, I don't know if y'all had a chance to watch this fight. It sounds like some of you guys had a chance to take a look at it. Like my impressions of this first fighter is I agree with Run, like something that people don't want to talk about because of everything that Dave said, right? It's kind of like two cultures kind of clashing, right? I mean, to having fights in the stands even, right? But like, yeah, dude, Chavez quit in that first one. I watched it, and I know that Chavez tends to come on and, tends to like, finally start, closing the pocket. But if you watch his other fights around that era, like he was taking his sweet time trying to close in on De La Hoya, and might have been that he didn't want any part of De La Hoya. De La Hoya, this is like one of his last fights where he gets to be the big man. Kind of reminds me of the way like Teofimo tries to be the big man at 135, right? It to me, it's you see a lot of parallels, and except with Oscar, he's a lot faster but more left hand dominant. Great jab, great jab, but he also sometimes kind of like squares up so that he can kind of shoot it from like right here. Great footwork, tons of energy, and I think that young Oscar, he's really good. Like if you watch him, like he's just got such fast eyes. Like you could see his eyes watching everything. Like he was really developed. And, I think that Oscar De La Hoya's ring IQ is underrated. Like he knows how to make his own adjustments. You could see him even making changes in the corner and trying to listen to people who are giving him good advice. But, and we're going to talk about this a bit too when we do the rescore. But I mean, I think Oscar De La Hoya's ring IQ is underrated. And a young Oscar who's like kind of young and a bull, you know what I mean? And ready to fight and, go toe to toe with the great Mexican and have the great Mexican, possibly stand down. Like, I mean, it was just weird. And then, you go to the rematch, and I thought the rematch was actually quite entertaining for people, who just can't bear to watch it again. Damn, you should go back and check out that fight, man. I'm telling you, it was a good fight. Lots of back and forth. And Julio Cesar Chavez, he kind of quit, right? He kind of quit. But I'll tell you, like, it was a damn good fight. Like, he kind of went out on his shield. He went out there, like, in his heart just, I don't know, man. Like, but it wasn't his chin. It was more like his heart. He kind of said, okay, like, I'm done. But the back and forth was amazing. Like, to me, like, Chavez was really just, like, trying to stick it to De La Hoya. And who knows what would have happened if the pace kept up like that. From what I saw, I think De La Hoya would have continued to win rounds probably. I don't think he would have been worn down. And at this point, Chavez is going up even further in weight, and he looked pretty good. Like, and he even said, like, I wasn't prepared sufficiently. Like, even though now there's a different story about the condition which Chavez was in. And by now he's 36 instead of 33. So, I mean, he's a bit older. But I mean, there was just no way. But I mean, like, I feel like he made a good account of himself, and it's like you see in this headline, like De La Hoya said, I want my respect, right? Because Chavez didn't give him respect in that first fight, saying, you didn't really beat me. That was a cut, right? And Chavez says, hey, man, this time it's personal. So it was really interesting to go back and just take a look at these fights in particular. And if you ask me, like, I think that these are good wins for Oscar De La Hoya. And a lot of people just don't want to credit Oscar for these wins. But I mean, to me, it's like, if you look at Chavez's record and you see how we treat people these days, like, we like to admonish each other and be like, oh, everybody just writes somebody off after a loss. I'm like, well, depending on how you feel with Chavez, like, he didn't have that many losses at all, and he wasn't that old. But I do understand and agree that he wasn't the same Chavez. And I mean, that happens with all great fighters.
Yeah, you're right. In the first fight, I didn't realize. So I remember watching it and I remember like the thing was, oh, well, Chavez is so old now. And then when I saw it again, I'm like, he was only 33. But, yes, he had 100 fights. So I guess in boxing years, he's 41. If you want to make a comparison to his 100 fights at the age of 33, because we saw how he used to fight. I mean, he wasn't a runner. He liked to bob and weave. He'll take a few shots, and then as he got older, he started to cut, so he couldn't really take as many shots as he used to. And that was something that they mentioned in the second fight. With the scar tissue that he supposedly, after the first fight, he went to go see a plastic surgeon to repair that scar tissue in the left eye that he got cut over. But 33 years old, and then you're like, that was old. But now if you look at some of the guys, just a few names just to name, but you can't really compare the careers or how many fights they had. Terrence Crawford is 34, right? And like, we're still like, he's still prime. Like, he still has like another 2 good prime years left to actually get some of these good fights. But when we look at Chavez, 100 fights, 33 years old, he's fighting a young De La Hoya. And I don't even think De La Hoya was like at his prime yet in that first fight. And then when I saw the second fight, you can see like the man already, like he became like a man in that second fight. You could just see, he just looked different, and you can tell he was determined. He had like the killer instinct, and he was in the first 4 rounds. He wasn't even sitting down in the stool, like he was standing up. Like, and then he would dog him back as they walked back. You could see him biting down his mouthpiece. You could just see, you know what, I'm gonna get Chavez's respect. And Chavez said it. He beats me fair and square. I'll give him the respect. And you're right. You know what? In the first fight, I think the cut over the eye scared him a little bit, especially that happening so early in the fight, in the first round. Within the minute that cut happened, and not to say that he wasn't tough, but I think he saw maybe the long haul over so many rounds. And De La Hoya is a really good fighter from the inside, a good jab, a good lead left uppercut as well, with the follow up with a left hook. I really saw he did that a lot against Chavez, and that Chavez being a little bit shorter and hunching over. But I feel like he quit more, if anything, in the second fight, and it was a cut in the inside of the mouth, along with just taking these shots and those body shots from De La Hoya.
Oh yeah. All right, man. We'll close this one up. But hell, there's a chance that El Chile might be talking about this later, like after we watch the documentary.
Yeah.
Hell, man, it might be worth talking about again, because it's important to go back, and it's like, and Room PMC kind of brought this to my attention back in the day. Like, some people weren't even familiar with like some of Canelo's older record, right? It's just like some people have only been around for like the last 5-6 years, like, and you just, it's not your fault if you don't know this stuff. But I mean, now I'm starting to kind of be like the generational fan, and I can kind of go like, oh, back in the day. It does make me bitter sometimes, because I'm like, oh, these old heads would have beat these new guys, no problem, if it was prime for prime, So we talk about it like that, but it does allow us to have some perspective, and it's like we all kind of grew up the same time. Oscar De La Hoya, he was kind of like, the Chicano, you know what I mean? And so I liked Oscar, I was a big fan of his. And does anybody have anything else to say about that before we wrap this one up real quick?
Actually, I do. I wanted to reference that. You know how by today's standards, we're always debating the pay-per-view model and the death of pay-per-view, and that Bob Arum actually did something that was really, really risky with this fight. Well, one of you mentioned closed circuit television. This fight wasn't carried on a traditional pay-per-view model. Not that I would, like I said in my story, I was in Mexico at the time, but the fight in the U.S. was only shown on closed circuit television because he was trying to combat piracy, something that a lot of people are struggling with today. They're trying to figure out, how do we stop piracy from people illegally streaming fights? Well, in those days, our parents used to pay the cable guy, and the cable guy would hook it up with this black box that showed every channel, including smut and including all the pay-per-views. And Bob Arum was so concerned about that he said, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to say only allow you to watch it on closed circuit television. He actually thought the fight would net him somewhere from $60 to $90 million. And he thought that he was going to get the same numbers that he would through the traditional pay-per-view model, which he expected somewhere between 1.7 and 2 million buys. And it only sold 750,000 and netted him somewhere around $14 million. So that first fight was a financial disaster for Bob Arum, taking this huge risk. Something I think it was interesting that I just wanted to bring up.
Yeah, dude, it was a calculated move. And hell, dude, shout out to the black box. I mean, those are some good memories, sneaking over there to the TV at night when nobody. No, I'm just kidding. But I'll tell you this.
Whoa.
No. But I'll tell you, the black box was the shit back in the day. And, these pay-per-view numbers would have been much larger. So I understand what Arum was concerned about. I mean, these days, a lot of people who use IPTV or they stream, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of piracy going on right now. And it's, I feel like a few years back, like you could still get on sites to watch watch like pay-per-views, but it was a little more like risky. Maybe you might get viruses. Like, I don't know. Now it just seems super clean these days and efficient. Like, the services that some people supposedly use, you know what I mean? Like, I'll tell you, like right now you could be paying for a $75 pay-per-view with one-time Thurman and Barrios, right? Or, you could pay maybe like $10 a month, to get a lot of fights that are available in that month. I mean, it's just something to think about, I mean, it's just different, so I definitely understand where you're coming from with that, dude. Like, it was a different time and maybe it was a misstep, but that fight, I mean, I like we can all relate, like that fight was big back in the day. So I'm glad we had a chance to cover it. All right, man. And before we move on to our controversial rescore, I just want to do a quick little summary on these boxers. And I also just want to say that, dude, we have tremendous respect for the great Julio Cesar Chavez and the great Oscar De La Hoya. But what I want to do is we've done some rescores here featuring Oscar. And before we close it out, I just want to ask George and Dave what their take was on these particular fights, just so we're all kind of caught up to date on how we scored things. Dave, do you have any recollection of how you looked at Oscar De La Hoya versus Ike Corte?
No, I don't. Not officially as a score, but
okay.
No.
Okay. And George?
I do remember watching it. Of course, I was a young teen, maybe 14, 15 years old. It was a really close fight. And I remember going in that 12th round, it pretty much it was the deciding factor, that knockdown. And Ike Corte, the bazooka, I remember him, man. He tough. He fought De La Hoya, I mean, absolutely well. And this, man, I mean, when I look back on it, it was in 1999. But from, like I said, from what I remember, it was definitely that 12th round was the deciding factor for De La Hoya. He almost had him out too. And I mean, I remember my dad finally, coming around to being a De La Hoya fan after, Chavez, going down, but he became a De La Hoya fan eventually because, of course, he's sporting the Mexican. But I remember my dad jumping up and down, stop, they should be stopping this fight. They should be stopping this fight. But Corte was throwing back. That's what I do remember. It just being really close to that very final, was like those last two rounds, and then that 12th round where Ike Corte goes down, and it was pretty close to being stopped. Good fight.
Oh yeah,
I should go back. Yeah, I definitely would go back and watch that one again.
Yeah, because that's when he started stepping up after the second Chavez fight. That's when he started fighting the real welterweights, right? So I mean, hell, dude, Oscar has one hell of a great career, and it's fun to go back and watch him run PMC. I'm realizing that we didn't ever talk about this one. Do you have any thoughts on that particular fight?
I agree that I don't know if you've thoughts of watching it live, because I didn't watch it live, to be honest. But what I would say is, from rewatching it, I think the knockdown was the difference, and it seemed like a lot. I don't know how HBO scored it, but I feel like a lot back then when you would score, at least you see how they're scoring, they utilized a lot of even rounds more, just to sort of, whether it's the cash cow, maybe to keep them closer in the fight or appear that to the public. I don't know how they scored this fight, but I would say probably I thought it was a really close fight, and I think De La Hoya edged it just with the knockdown at the end.
Yeah, I'm with you, Ron. And George, what do you think about the Pernell Whitaker fight? Did you watch that one?
I remember that one a little bit. I do remember, of course, that was, I mean, I know the word controversy gets thrown out there a lot, especially with that one. Two sides of the story. I mean, two sides of that. People thought it was Pernell Whitaker that won that fight. You had, of course, the supporters that thought that De La Hoya won the fight. And then you have people like me. I thought it was a draw. I mean, Pernell Whitaker did really well, especially when he fought Chavez as well, too. He made, his style was a nightmare for so many of these guys. He was making De La Hoya miss a lot. And when I believe, again, some of these fights, I'm going to go back. I would love to rewatch it and try to rescore on my own. But now, I have a different perspective on it. And you have the four criteria of boxing. I mean, the big one there was for Pernell Whitaker was the defense, and yeah, De La Hoya was trying to land, but he was just missing a lot. He was getting countered. He was making De La Hoya look pretty silly, but I felt like at the time I thought it was a draw.
Damn. Well, there you go, man. Thank you for your opinion. And Dave, did you ever watch this one? Did you have any thoughts on it?
I did, man. And that was really truly a great era that Oscar was involved with at that division. Pernell Whitaker, stylistically, I mean, I can't think of a welterweight right now Can you guys that has that style? And it was just a great era, and it wasn't a weak era in the welterweight division when Oscar was there. There was so many fantastic fighters, and it just gonna remind me that this weekend we're gonna see Thurman. That I mean, I don't even think a fighter like Thurman in his current condition could keep up with the fighters of that era.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the defense, Pernell he was slippery, like even on the inside, and he was also dangerous on the inside. And he was kind of undersized for welterweight.
He had like that sneaky power. I think that's where he had a lot of guys thinking twice about trying to attack. Like he had like that sneaky power, and him being southpaw, throwing that left hand. That's what I remember. That's what I remember of Pernell Whitaker.
Yeah, and the Al Chile crew said that one was, I mean, it was kind of like a 50-50. Like, that's one of the ones where if we ever have to go back and redo one, like my scoring has changed and my philosophy on like, well, you have to like take it from the champ has kind of shifted a little bit. And I remember giving Whitaker a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because he was the defending champion, right? But I mean, if I'm not doing that anymore because my philosophy might have changed, although, I still think that I still kind of have that feeling, but that's something that I would want to go back and rewatch eventually. Run, did you want to give your little 2 cents on how you saw it when we scored it?
Yeah, I don't remember my exact score, but I'm pretty sure I had Pernell Whitaker winning clearly. I don't remember if we classified it as a robbery since that was one of the early ones we did, but I think I had Pernell Whitaker winning clearly. But it definitely was a competitive fight. It wasn't like a landslide victory, but I think I just, like I said, clear win for Whitaker. But I wouldn't mind going back eventually and redoing that one just to see how our scoring has evolved over this segment we have.
Me too. Plus, I know Sean, who's in the chat, he likes Pernell Whitaker just like we all do, and he didn't have a chance to join us, so maybe we could do just like a revisit on that one. And then, what do you guys think about the Trinidad fight, George? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I a lot of people were upset, if you want to call it running, the last few rounds for De La Hoya. I mean, I thought he put enough rounds in the bank to keep that, to get that win, and then he still even outboxed him at the very end of those rounds. I don't think Trinidad won that fight. He, like you said, he gave him a boxing lesson, and that's exactly what he did. And I mean, I know Trinidad was trying to make the fight, but just De La Hoya was the more superior boxer. He did everything well. He countered, he jabbed, body work. But I think going back to it, I'm sure De La Hoya, this is probably one of those fights that De La Hoya wishes he can get back and maybe not circle the ring as much as he should have. I thought De La Hoya won that fight pretty very clearly, I thought.
And Dave, what do you think, brother?
Oh man, that fight's something interesting, definitely, because historically it was the one time that Oscar De La Hoya clearly learned a lesson. Giving up those late rounds, he had some poor advice in his corner. Actually, it looked like, he was in agreement that if he could just take his foot off the gas and coast to a clear victory that he thought was a clear victory. But the judges in Las Vegas, they didn't agree with that. This was a win that he had in the bag, and he should have just applied just a bit more pressure in the last 2 rounds, and he had it in the bag. A lot of controversy surrounding that. It's a great fight to go watch as a classic fight, particularly if you're into the great rivalry between Mexico and Mexican-American fighters in Puerto Rico.
Oh, yeah. Punch Smollett's in the house. Thanks for joining us, bro. Man and Water, thank you for joining us. And Man and Water says, take it from the champ is bogus. Who won more rounds? And I agree with that. I think the person who wins the most rounds should win the fight. Just for clarification, I mean, like when a round, in my opinion, is totally even and could go either way, I'll favor the defending champion. That's just me. Like if I truly don't know who to give it to, because that's one of the things that we find out while doing all these rescores. Like there are super freaking close rounds, and it can be up to interpretation. And even if you have your own interpretation, sometimes there's not much to choose from, or sometimes it's pretty equal. So that's all I mean. But I Run PMC looks like he agrees. And so yeah, man. If that's the case, and the challenger should be start being down 3 to 4 rounds. Run, did you want to give a quick little breakdown of how you felt about the Trinidad fight?
I think I had that a draw. I think I had that fight a draw. I don't remember my exact scorecard, but I just think when you give away 3 rounds, no matter like if you give away a fourth of the fight, that's a lot just giving it away without really giving much output against your opponent. So I think I had that one a draw. because I remember exactly like again that'd be another one good to rescore. But I wish I had my exact scorecard in front of me. But I think that one was a 114, and I think that was one probably where their HBO had it pretty wide for De La Hoya.
Yeah, no, and I kind of had it the way Run did, and it's like Run said, and you all said, like, well, I feel like Oscar really didn't do himself any favors, and I think George Foreman was saying at the end, like, hey, Oscar's leaving it in the hands of the judges, and I couldn't agree more. And look at Noteball, man, he ducked, right, because he didn't want to talk about the Civil War, because it was just too much for him to handle. Talk about El Gran Campeon like that, didn't want to, and here he is. Noteball Buxanos, man, we're happy you're here, brother. Look at this dude draw. See, Noteball couldn't help himself, and he kind of gave me a scorecard. I'll talk about that later. But for the De La Hoya Sturm score, like, Noteball, we all know Noteball. You know what I'm saying? He's my homie. And so for the last one, I just want to know what you guys think about the second Mosley fight. That's another one that's close. Not considered controversial, but some people think De La Hoya won it. George, do you have any opinion on that one? Dave, what do you think, brother? Do you have any memories of that particular fight?
A very close fight. Very close fight. It's a great rivalry those two guys had. Fantastic rivalry. I definitely want to go back and watch that. Let me just add real quick to you brought up the Trinidad fight and the Oscar De La Hoya fight, and I know I'm going back to it, but I had an interview with Xander Zayas very early in his career after his first pro fight. It's not even on my YouTube channel, but in that interview, he referenced to me how important that down the line in his professional career, he gets a fight to the magnitude of Oscar De La Hoya versus Trinidad. And I thought that was one of the things I really enjoy about Xander Zayas, as well as being a humble kid, but how he recognizes boxing history, right? He is looking forward to a marquee fight against a Mexican-American fighter or a Mexican fighter down the line in his career.
Run, what'd you think about that fight, brother? Thank you, Dave.
I think Oscar won the second one. Like I said, all these I don't have my scorecards on hand, but I think Oscar edged that one out. He definitely didn't get out hustled like he did in the first one against Mosley. So I think he won that fight. And it's sort of ironic that Mosley was on stuff for that second fight and he didn't perform as well.
Yeah, I personally prefer their first fight. Like, I do think that Oscar edged it out as well, but the first fight was more superior. They were just really banging it out with speed, power, and then the second one, like, I think they were just touching it up way too much. Oscar just kept touching it up, touching it up, touching it up. Like, I've never seen two fighters touch it up so much. I understand that they were cool with each other, but to me, it really took away from the fight. Although I think what Oscar was doing was very successful. And that's another reason why I say I think Oscar has that ring IQ. Like, he knows like what Senior like was putting into him, and he can do it, but his stamina can't hold up in that style. And I think that's what happened in that fight. Like, he was winning rounds doing it, and then he couldn't keep it up, and then he irked out enough towards the end to get that win. But I thought it was close. I personally wouldn't call it a robbery, but I had De La Hoya winning that fight. Hey, George, what did you think of, before we move on to our controversial rescore? I just want to know, brother, what did you think about that fight? Did the second Mosley fight?
Oh, second Mosley fight. I agree. De La Hoya definitely won that fight. It's unfortunate, like they said, Mosley dropped dirty for whatever it was. I remember the first fight, like you said, it was really back and forth, but Mosley dominated. I remember too, listening to the corners, and Mosley was complaining about like his back stiffening up on him, and that was due to that good De La Hoya jab. But second fight, I agree with pretty much most of everybody is that De La Hoya won that fight, and I don't really remember it, but if I rewatch it, I'm sure I'll catch up on those little moments of him, him and Mosley touching gloves. But I do remember him winning, and it was a close fight. I think someone said 7-5. I would agree that it was 7-5 or 8-4.
Well, there you go. Thank you guys so much. And dude, we're gonna get into it now, man. We're doing our controversial rescore of Oscar De La Hoya moving up to middleweight to fight Felix Sturm. And we got the one and only Run PMC to break it down for us and tell us what was going on at the time. Run, please take it away.
Alrighty, so De La Hoya Sturm took place on June 5th, 2004 from the MGM Grand Garden Arena Paradise, Nevada, which seems to be the commonplace that we've done a lot of our rescores as of late, because it was so popular starting in the 90s and really going in until the mid 2000s and even 2020s. We still have some big fights over there. But this was for Felix Sturm's WBO middleweight title, and then at the time this was Sturm's second defense of the belt, and he was still undefeated. De La Hoya definitely had a great record at this point too, being a 5-time champion, reigning from 130 to 154, and only having 3 losses. We touched on all of them just now. All of them except one. We touched on one Mosley defeat, which he's coming off in this fight. His controversial defeat to Trinidad, and then the first Mosley fight, which he lost. And then, like I said a few minutes ago, this is an interesting time too, because Mosley popped dirty. Or he didn't really pop. He admitted to it. He didn't test positive for anything, but he admitted to the blood doping for the second De La Hoya fight. And if De La Hoya would have won that fight, he would have retained his WBA and WBC 154 belts, and he would have had one fewer loss on his record. So it's just interesting how things could have gone. But De La Hoya's resume, as we touched on, was nothing but spectacular. Like, these are just a few of the guys he beat: Jorge Paez, John Molina, Rafael Relis, Jesse James Leja, Gennaro Hernandez, Chavez twice, Pernell Whitaker, Hector Camacho, I Corte, Arturo Gatti, Fernando Vargas, and Uriboy Campos. So up until this point, that's what his resume. It's pretty strong resume, and it's, I think, at least for me, in my opinion, probably the best Mexican American boxer of all time. And then who knows? He's definitely up there if you have to look at it for his strength of his resume, especially when his few fights he had compared to other Mexican boxers, as being one of the greatest Mexican boxers of all time. So it's definitely something to talk about. But in the corners, we had Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Joe Chavez, rest in peace. And then we had Joel De La Hoya, who had Oscar De La Hoya's brother, who was always in his corner. And this was an interesting type of pay-per-view we had here, because we had Bernard Hopkins fought Robert Allen in their third match. Right before this fight, it was an easy unanimous decision win for B-Hop. And then it was really setting up Oscar to step in and fight B-Hop in their next fight, which ended up being announced 2 days later. But so they would cut to little interviews with B-Hop in between rounds. They would show him in between rounds, when watching from his locker room on TV the fight, and sort of how B-Hop, he expressed his how nervous he was that he wasn't going to get the fight, the De La Hoya, and lose out on a career high payday to that point with De La Hoya, because he might have thought Oscar lost this fight. But if you're looking at De La Hoya's career, this was his penultimate fight with Top Rank, because right after the B-Hop fight, he formed Golden Boy Promotions officially as a legitimate promotional company, brought B-Hop aboard. Mosley later came on board, and then briefly Ricky Hatton was on board with Golden Boy UK. And so this was the last thing I want to touch on. This was the first fight which was for undisputed with the 4 belts. So the WBA, WBC, IBF, and WBO. And I wanted to touch on some just sort of brief history on the different sanctioning bodies that we have here. As we know, and most of this information is I got from one of the best resources for boxing history and just boxing breakdowns, in my opinion, on the internet, and that's Rumi's Corner. He has great videos, whether boxing history, fighters, career breakdowns, and just sort of classic matchups. But a lot of this stuff is from his channel, on the. I guess it would be, I forgot what the name of the video was, but it was more of a talking about Undisputed and how it's evolved. But everyone check out his channel. But the WBA started in 1921 out of the National Boxing Association in New Jersey, and eventually moved to Panama in 1962. WBC was founded in 1963 in Mexico City. And the funny thing, that their whole thing was to unify boxing and stop improper expansion of boxing. And it's sort of funny because the WBC has changed boxing in so many ways, but they wanted to monitor and regulate and not allow boxing to grow as much and cause unneeded rules and it's funny, they have unneeded belts and unneeded weight classes in the WBC. The IBF is still the only sanctioning body that was started in the United States, out of New Jersey, founded in 1982, and they really gained prominence with really giving championships early on. To gain prominence was from Larry Holmes, Aaron Pryor, Marvin Hagler, and Donald Curry. And lastly, the WBO, founded in Puerto Rico, and really up until this fight was more of a international type of belt with the Klitschko's holding this belt. Calzaghe versus Eubank was for this belt at 168. Riddick Bowe versus Herbie Hyde was for this belt, and then at the time HBO didn't even recognize, at the time of the Bowe fight, didn't even recognize the WBO as a legitimate sanctioning body. And also, it's interesting enough that the WBO wasn't recognized by the other sanctioning bodies until much later as well. The WBA didn't recognize it until 2001, WBC didn't recognize it 2004, and the IBF didn't even recognize it until 2006. And it's funny, the WBO didn't recognize the other sanctioning bodies fully until 2008. So this fight, at least according to Vermi's Corner, which I would have to agree with, really did solidify the WBO as being a major belt, and it sort of forced it upon us, opposed to just having the WBA, WBC, and IBF. And where we see this happen sometimes in not the same sanctioning body, but a different sanctioning body with the IBO. A lot of people, whether it's the broadcasters or maybe they do it in just promotional information, they seem to be pumping the IBO, and they've done it for a while. I see probably the most recognized champion that used to put out the IBO a lot was Gennady Golovkin at middleweight, which he was the WBA regular and the IBO champion. So hopefully the IBO doesn't become a recognized belt, because then I would just throw off Undisputed even more. And some people might look at like it legitimizes it, but also could delegitimize it just because it throws so many more politics in there, having another sanctioning body potentially needing 5 belts to be a undisputed champion. So Chicano, now that we're moving on to the actual scoring of this fight, how'd you have this one?
All right, man. Run. Thank you so much, brother. Well, hey, dude, I actually thoroughly enjoyed this fight. I got to say, out of all the rescores that we've done, like this one was one of the more entertaining ones. Like, I thought Oscar started out great. Like I was surprised. Like he came out guns blazing, and you know, I'm realizing that I didn't really remember this fight properly. Like I'd seen it once. I thought I had Sturm winning, but when I watched it, I didn't realize what a hot start Oscar came out into. Like he just, to me, it felt like he was coming out to kind of like blow out this guy who was considered to be like, you know, not, I would never say this, but like, man, like a Euro bum, you know, lesser belt champion. Like he was just going to go and try to like spark this guy out. Like he came and he sat on his punches. On top of that too, like he was fast, he was strong. On top of that too, like really well developed right hand. Like I don't think I've seen Oscar with like such a good right hand ever. It was fast. He hit it to the body. You could hear the snap on it. I was thoroughly impressed, you know, but even after that second round, you know, you can hear Floyd Sr. saying, well, hey, man, you know, slow it down. And that was one of my things. Like I was worried about De La Hoya's stamina, and he started to fade. But his ring IQ kept him in the fight, in my opinion. But I did have Sturm winning this fight. I had an 8-4, and I gave De La Hoya rounds 1, 2, 3, and 8. And the swing rounds I had were round 2, round 5, and round 8. But even if I gave every swing round that went to Sturm to De La Hoya, this fight was, in my opinion, a robbery. Like I think that De La Hoya would have gotten lucky to even get a draw, but the fact that he came and he won, to me, I classify this one as a robbery. I have it 8-4 for Felix Sturm. So, Dave, this is your first time here, man. So, you know, please let us know like what you think about this fight. Then how'd you score it? And was it a robbery in your opinion?
You know, my whole memory of this fight was that it was a clear robbery. And what's really interesting is now that you invite me to go back and carefully rescore this. All right, I want to second that. Oscar came in with a really hot start to this fight, and he had moved up, and there was a lot of question about whether or not he was going to have stamina issues, and his physique. His physique actually, to me as well, did not look very good at middleweight. You know, he was bloated looking in the face. He had very soft abdominals, even love handles. So it was impressive how hot his start was. In the first 6 rounds, he had a few rounds by today's numbers for any middleweight, throwing 103 punches in the first round, 82 and 81 later on in the first half. Those were tremendous numbers. So I do have Oscar edging comfortably the first half of the fight until where he started to fade, and the cleaner and more effective shots started going towards Felix Sturm in the second half of the fight. Partially because Oscar's punches, he wasn't a real big puncher at 160. We know that he wasn't going to be, but neither was Felix Sturm. I was impressed with Oscar's drive in the 12th round, which I thought he won that round. And I have this fight very much closer than my memory had it. So I had this fight at 7-5 for Felix Sturm. And if you go by the crowd in Las Vegas, the judges could have been swayed by the hometown audience. It was an audience. Las Vegas had become the home of Oscar De La Hoya, and especially the MGM Grand. So was that a factor? I don't think anything was going to stop that B-Hop fight because, like you said, they kept referencing and showing in the green room the B-Hop, and that fight was going to happen no matter what. This was a very hard thing for Felix Sturm to come to Las Vegas and beat Oscar De La Hoya. He just did not do enough to get the judges to sway him for what I think was 7-5, but like a robbery, the way even the comments go, if you go to various forums, it was a robbery, but it wasn't the worst robbery I've ever seen.
All right, Dave, thank you so much for taking a look at this one and giving us your 2 cents. George, what do you think about this one, man?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I mean the word robbery, right? I wouldn't say like it was like Dave just said. There's been worse robberies, but I would label this like a robbery, but not a complete whitewashed of Felix Sturm completely dominating De La Hoya, which, to start with, De La Hoya, of course, came out guns blazing, like that first minute in the first round, which I gave him the first round just for that. But as soon as Sturm started getting that jab going, like immediately, you can tell it was a shock. And De La Hoya said it; he knew already that this was going to be he has a really good jab. Emmanuel Stewart also mentioning that he wasn't in the commentating, but he's mentioned stuff about Felix Sturm at the time that he has underrated hand speed, that he actually has some good hand speed, that it would actually be a lot closer with the hand speed and the jab for Sturm. Yeah, I gave De La Hoya that first round. And it was, like you said, it was pretty cool. Now that you mentioned it, Dave, is for him throwing and landing so many punches as a middleweight, then and now, that was pretty awesome to see. And then this is his first middleweight fight, so him coming up, he did look a little bloated. He was a little soft. I remember that. I remember watching this one live at my uncle's house, and of course the setting in the house was kind of quiet about halfway through that fight. They were like looking at each other like, I don't think this De La Hoya and Bernard Hopkins fight's gonna happen if the judges are gonna be fair. But we already knew that fight was already set. Like you said, 2 days later it was mentioned. One round that I really saw Felix Sturm dominate De La Hoya was in the 7th. And then there was a comment that Larry Merchant made. He said that if you didn't know who De La Hoya and Sturm was, you would have thought Sturm was actually De La Hoya and De La Hoya was Sturm, the way he was. Like, this was towards the end of like the later part of the fight where you see Sturm start to dominate some of those later rounds. You would have thought the other way around, that Sturm was De La Hoya and De La Hoya Sturm. A good jab. De La Hoya couldn't really hurt Sturm that much, and I think that's what the commentating there, Roy Jones, Larry Merchant, they were thinking that was going to be the deciding factor to maybe De La Hoya to get a late stoppage, was putting in the body work. And you see it affected him a little bit, but Sturm was just a big middleweight. And this is De La Hoya's first fight, actually, again, coming off of a Mosley loss, but we know he won. And I think the closest fight that he had comparable to Sturm was the Javier Castillejo. And they were comparing Castillejo to Sturm. And I remember that they were saying, well, if De La Hoya beats Castillejo, then he'll have no problem fighting Sturm. And I think this was an eliminator, correct, that the winner would get Bernard Hopkins. But, of course, we saw De La Hoya. He got it. And then I just want to mention, like, I wrote down some notes. I have the copy box numbers after the 10th round. After 10 rounds, Oscar was landing 23% of his shots. He threw 685 and landed only 159. And then Sturm landing actually a little bit higher percentage at 41%. He threw 451 and landed 185. And then, like, the final copy box numbers, you see, of course, De La Hoya obviously throwing a lot more, but not landing as much. He was landing at 24%, only landing 188. Sturm 43%, landing 234 out of 541 punches thrown. I had it at the end of this. I had it 8-5. I had Sturm, of course, winning. And then that was with the swing rounds too. My swing rounds were 1, 4, and 8. I gave Sturm 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then De La Hoya 1, 2, 4, and 5. And I mean, it was a good fight, man. And then the card that was on there too, of course, was the Bernard Hopkins and Allen. It was kind of, I remember those times where you knew the next two guys that were going to be fighting, they put them on the same card, co-main event, main event, and that's how it was set. I think this was De La Hoya's first time. I could be wrong. Was this his first Golden Boy promotion fight? Right, it was like a co-promo with Top Rank. I'm not too sure if any of you guys remember that. But again, it definitely was a robbery, but I wouldn't say it was like a complete bad robbery that we were upset about it. But again, I had Sturm winning this one 8-4.
All right, Sturm in a close but clear decision. Thank you so much, George. Run PMC. What'd you think about this fight, brother?
It was a good one to go back and watch, and like we touched on in the intro, is just definitely being the first undisputed fight with all 4 belts that are now considered the modern belts. It definitely is a step in, I guess, where boxing has gone from there. Because like after that, the only undisputed champions that have had 4 belts, well, this leading into the Biop fight, were Bernard Hopkins, Jermaine Taylor, Crawford, Usyk, Taylor, and Canelo now. So not that many since then, and that's this 2004. That's like almost 18 years ago. So not that much action undisputed since then. But I had the fight. I also had it. I agree with Chicano 8-4, and George. I think George had 8-4 as well. That it was 8-4 Sturm. I think this fits the perfect cliche of tale of 2 fights, where De La Hoya came out, like as we talked about, just blazing in those first few rounds with the body work. He was landing just crazy shots to the body, and just his overall work, his output was so high that it got me wondering. I'm like, it's either that De La Hoya, since we did talk about how high of an IQ he has, is if he just has such self-awareness that he knows he needs to get out early because he doesn't have the stamina to go on, especially at the elevated weight class. So that might have been, he's like, I might try to bank these rounds early and then try to outbox, or maybe try to get Sturm out of there early, and so he doesn't have to go deep into the fight. But for the breakdown of rounds, I had Sturm winning the 2nd, the 6th, the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10, 11, 12. So I gave De La Hoya 1, 3, 4, and 5. And then my close rounds were 3, 4, 6. So even if I gave I had 3 close rounds and 2 of them were De La Hoya's rounds. So that's just, I had an 8-4. I think Sturm was just past the 6th round. I think it was just clear De La Hoya's output went way down. Sturm just started coming on actually at that point, and then he was doing everything he wanted. Sturm was popping the jab, using his athleticism to move around and box. But then at times, I think someone said it was the 7th round, he started coming on and landing real power shots. And even in the 11th round, he turned to southpaw and was landing like winging left hooks, like sort of like James DeGale looking like left hooks that were coming and landing on Oscar. And he actually hurt Oscar. He hurt him in the 12th round, wobbled him. It was around like a minute left in the fight. I saw a slight wobble in Oscar, and so then that was probably not from Sturm's punching power, but maybe of just getting Oscar eating so many punches and just fatigue at that point in the fight. As for scoring, I think the round that I would say probably made it closer on the cards, or maybe justified it to the public that was closer, was that 10th round that Letterman gave it to De La Hoya, and I had it a clear Sturm round, but I mean, I guess we score what we like. But yeah, I mean, I think Floyd Senior was giving him great instructions in the corner, at least for the first half, telling him, all right, stay on the jab, back him up. And that point's telling him just shoe shine, don't use as much energy as he was, because Oscar was using a lot of energy early in the fight, and he burned out, and we've seen that. And I've always wondered if it's Oscar's stamina or if it's a combination of his mental strength too, because we see in fights that he just turns off. Like he got out hustled late in the Mosley fight, the Trinidad fight. I don't think he got necessarily out hustled, but it seemed like he just was I don't know, giving up, or he just sort of thought he had it in the bag. And then we saw it in this fight, he gassed out. And then the Floyd Mayweather fight, he abandoned the jab also, like around the 6th round time, and allowed Floyd Mayweather to get back into the fight and edge it out. So it's just a sort of a pattern we see from Oscar, but nevertheless, great fight.
All right, thank you so much. And so do you classify this one as a robbery?
Yes, I would say even though it's 8-4, which is just it's only 2 rounds away from a draw. Being that 2 of my close rounds I gave to Oscar, and I don't know, it's hard when you just I think you get swept with the second half of the fight. I think it's a robbery.
All right. Thank you so much, Run PMC. Noteball's decided to join us now that we're done talking about the Civil War. You know, he's kind of come and he can talk to us about this particular fight. Noteball, thank you for joining us, man. Sliding some time in to talk to us about this fight, brother. I don't know how much time you have, but please go right ahead and tell us how you had this fight.
Well, I don't have my scorecard on me, but I did manage to. I watched it about 3 times. The first time I was kind of like let in with the kind of like the battle of the wills, and I was actually impressed with Oscar. You know what I mean? Because this was the other guy was basically, I think he just went in there. He didn't even.
Nopal, I'm so sorry, brother. I don't mean to interrupt you. Is anybody having trouble hearing Nopal?
Yeah, he's breaking up.
I'm having
Yeah.
issues.
Hey, Nopal. Hey, brother. I don't know if I didn't mean to interrupt you, man, but we're having trouble. Now we can hear you. We were having trouble hearing you, bro. If you wouldn't mind kind of maybe starting over a little bit.
Okay. I saw this time, like I was saying, last time, third time is finally. What I noticed from particular.
Damn, brutal, man. You got cut. Well, you know, I think with Nopal, I don't know if he's going to jump back on, but the impression he gave me was that, you know, hey, man, this fight was close, yo. That's what he had to say. That's his general impression. You know what I mean? So we'll see if he comes back on. But let's open it up, man. If anybody wants to give any final thoughts or just kind of talk about this fighter, maybe Oscar's career, what he was doing at middleweight, just any observations that you'd like to talk about. Actually, let's give Nopal one last try here. Let me see.
You guys,
But yeah, man.
know?
You're coming in. Go ahead and speak. No, I can't hear you, brother.
Okay, my scorecard was 8-4.
Okay, I can hear you.
Scorecard was okay. My scorecard was 8-4. Oscar. I feel like for this fight, there was like circumstances. I know you guys all had it for Sturm, but a guy like Sturm's not just going to get in there and just jab a couple jabs here and there. I mean, he had way more accuracy, but even the smaller guy Oscar, he still managed to get in there 2 shots from all angles. You know, don't big risk, you know, and
hey, brother, you know, I'm so sorry, man. It's really bad, man. I'm so sorry. But dude, we got what you mainly had to say, brother. It looks like Nopal had Oscar beating Sturm 8-4. I'm glad you had a chance to roll in, bro, and tell us what you thought. Feel free to hang around if you can get some better reception. But I'd like to open it up, bro, until your mic gets a little better and just kind of give some final thoughts towards this fight and Oscar's career towards the end. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to add to this conversation?
Yes, I want to add something is that even though I think Oscar lost this fight, it just shows how good of a fighter is that even like going up and down weight classes, being the 6th weight class and challenging for a title. Well, he won the title, but then challenging for undisputed in the 6th weight class just shows how impressive, especially late in his career, that Oscar's talent and his intelligence in the ring and just what a good fighter he was is that I think sometimes that gets lost with just like some of the out of the ring stuff he gets into now gets lost and people forget how good of a boxer he actually was and really and even in his losses he was pushing these guys for the most part and he really had iconic wins as well like the Vargas win. I always remember that because I was in my mind with obviously we know Vargas was on stuff later, but it's like when you see the difference in like the physical appearances, it's like Vargas was jacked for that fight, and then De La Hoya comes in, and Oscar with one of the, Vargas for that fight, one of the most iconic, in my opinion, ring entrances when he burst through the temple as being like the Aztec warrior, and then he just comes out and Oscar just shuts him up and really destroys him. But I think we just have to remember how great Oscar was, even though We just have to separate like his in the ring from out of the ring when we talk about his career. But great fighter, Oscar De La Hoya.
Oh yeah, and George, I wanted to touch on something that you said. You were kind of mentioning how like it almost seemed like if you weren't sure like who was who, that maybe you were looking at Sturm being De La Hoya, and I kind of agree with that too. Like I think Sturm also had a very good jab. He just had more thudding power. He was just naturally bigger and stronger. On top of that too, like I felt early on, Oscar was doing really well, but once he started slowing down, I think Sturm's shell defense was pretty effective. Like although Oscar could wing that impressive right hand to the body that I'd never seen like quickly, like. It could be blocked. On top of that, too, we were talking about that crowd, man. Like, if you go back and watch, like, man, what a one-sided crowd. Anything Oscar would do, people would just be cheering. So I could definitely see judges being influenced by just the crowd noise. But, when I went back and actually watched some particular rounds, again, just out of curiosity, like, you could see, like, a lot of them are grazing or not really connecting or, to me, Sturm was doing the cleaner, more effective work, and I think Sturm, although some people like Shushan, I agree with that too, Dave, when he says Sturm did fail to impose a size and strength advantage, like I think he could have pushed it, but he had a steady temperament. So like, I do think that maybe he should have pushed it more, but to me, he still clearly won the fight. But he should have known, like, if you're going up against the golden boy, like we talk about cash cow privilege, like back then, although, maybe Oscar didn't get some favorable decisions, but against a guy like Sturm, like, he's not going to walk away with the belt, in my opinion. So I thought it was pretty interesting to see the dynamics. Also, interesting to go back and watch the De La Hoya versus Chavez fight with De La Hoya as the big man. And then later on, in his early 30s, not the young bull, not the big guy, fighting against a guy who's naturally much bigger. Like the contrast was very apparent. And so it was interesting to kind of go back and watch those two Oscars, and although, I think Oscar did make a good account of himself, like he really went in there and tried. Like I think Floyd Mayweather Sr. did a great job of trying to calm down try to calm down Oscar. Oscar was saying, "Oh, he's winning. I can't move." And Floyd was just trying to be that steady presence of temperament there, making sure Oscar got his breaths, not to panic, not to get discouraged. So great corner work. I actually really like hearing how lucid Floyd Mayweather Sr. is back then. Like it was just impressive to hear the corner work.
Yeah, and the comment, I think, like I said, I think it came from Larry Merchant, and it was pretty funny, but at the same time, I was like, shit, I and then like the crowd, yeah, they were in. Of course, it was one sided, but I want to say actually about like the 7th round, you can tell, if you read the room, you can see that the crowd kind of died down a little bit, and they weren't really behind De La Hoya. And yeah, when he would throw shots to the body, because he was a good body puncher, the crowd got back into it. And I think as far as Sturm, he had a really good defense. And when you watch it, like I think I watched a few like the swing rounds that were close because I wanted to make sure I was giving the round to the right person, in my opinion. He was blocking a lot with those elbows. He had like long arms and he tucked his body really well. So he was taking some of those shots off the arm. Some of them were blocked. And it was pretty awesome to see him switch to southpaw. And I think at that moment, I think that's when Sturm knew, you know what, I'm in the driver's seat right now. I got this fight. And from there on, and he was landing left hand after left hand. He was landing some good uppercuts. And going back to De La Hoya's career, I could be wrong, but I'm just going off what I remember right now. I feel like he may be like the greatest Mexican American boxer of all time. And I'm sure some people think differently, but in my opinion, I remember most of his career because I was a teenager to my early 20s or mid 20s watching De La Hoya's career, and he fought everybody. If you thought he'd lost to Pernell Whitaker or he beat him, regardless of some of those close fights, he fought everybody and he completely dominated. He was just a different fighter at that time. And actually, on my way home here before we jumped on, when I was watching that fight, I thought to myself, how would have a prime Chavez done against a prime De La Hoya? Like, to me, that's a good question, and I really couldn't figure it out. It might sound crazy, but I feel like I would have favored De La Hoya just a little bit better, just just based off the boxing skill that he was a good outside fighter and he had a really good jab. But it would have been a lot closer if this would have been a prime for prime. But in my opinion, I would have slightly favored De La Hoya if there was a prime for prime there.
What weight were you thinking for this fight?
Man, I mean, maybe 140. Because I know the best De La Hoya was 147, like one of you guys mentioned. So if you were to put them prime for prime, or even 135, anywhere between 135 and 140, that would have been a damn good fight. But I just feel like De La Hoya, being a good boxer from the outside, he was your traditional boxer puncher, and I just think like that lead hand would have made a difference, and I don't know, I think it would have been a little overwhelming for Chavez, and Chavez being a little bit of a late starter, I think De La Hoya would have been able to bank in some of those rounds, and De La Hoya's got a good chin. I think a lot of people don't realize either how much of a good chin De La Hoya really had.
Man, I co-sign all of that. Does anybody have any final thoughts, Shushan, before we wrap it up?
That fight where he won his sixth title in 6-weight class, at that moment in time, he had already done something that we've never seen another boxer do, and that's be a Grammy-nominated recording artist while being a 6-weight division champion. There hasn't been a boxer. I can argue that Tyson Fury's got a beautiful voice, but he wasn't nominated for a Grammy.
I think Pacquiao might be close. I think he may have had a career too, but I don't know Grammy. But
Hey,
the Filipinos love him.
Broner, Danny Garcia.
Oh, Danny Garcia.
That's right.
He's a promoter.
None of them Grammy nominated.
Yeah, you're right.
No,
absolutely.
I'm just joking. Joking.
Man, Ron, you got anything on that, brother?
No, I think we touched on everything. I have nothing else to say about it.
All right, great. Well, we can classify that one as a robbery, but real quick, I want to read what Sean has to say, because he also had it a robbery. He says that he had it Sturm 8-4. He only gave De La Hoya 1, 2, 4, and 5. The second half was all Sturm, and that De La Hoya attempted to work the body early and wear down Sturm. While De La Hoya had some success early, the natural middleweight Sturm was able to withstand the early onslaught to take control of the fight in the later rounds with his physical size advantages and his ability to get on the inside of De La Hoya at will, and he continuously beat De La Hoya to the punch throughout the fight. Usually on the gringo meter, 8-4 isn't typically a robbery, but for this one with no swing rounds in his mind, it was a robbery. So he says that, he hopes that the chat doesn't attack him or the Mexicans don't attack him for that, but it is what it is, man. All right, well, hey, we are just about to wrap it up, but we got to discuss what we're going to score next. So let's take a little look and then run PMC. Here's what we have remaining, man. And I don't know if you had a chance to catch what went on last week, but we were thinking that maybe we'll save the Muhammad Ali versus Jimmy Young, Muhammad Ali versus Ken Norton fights for a little bit later, but since we can maybe go and, talk about what really happened with Chavez's career, talk about what really happened with Oscar De La Hoya's career, who were both all-time greats. Like, we're going to have to address the great Muhammad Ali eventually. It's another area where people just don't want to talk about it, but we do have some remaining good fights that are available for this next week. So what do you think of this list, Ron? Is there anything that stands out to you?
I think the one that stood out to me, just because he just fought this past weekend, is Sergio Martinez versus Martin Murray. I think that would be a good one, but I'm open to hearing whatever everyone else has to say as well.
All right. Well, I know you guys are guests, but you guys are family here, man. So, is there anything that you guys like on here that maybe you'd want to have us address next week, and if you could join us too, that'd be great.
Manny Pacquiao versus Jeff Horn and Sergio Martinez. I like the Manny Pacquiao versus Jeff Horn, and the reason why is it's recent, and it also is going to coincide with potentially George Kambosos, the new undisputed champion at 135 pounds, hosting possibly an American talent or hosting an international talent going down under, and we'll see. We'll see if that person gets a fair shot in Australia.
I agree. The Pacquiao and Horn, that's a standout.
Man. Well, let's try it out. And it's like all I can say is that I only watched I watched most of the fight, but it was on a choppy feed, and I had Pacquiao winning from what I remember, but I didn't like what I was seeing. That's what I remember about the fight. But a lot of people do classify this one as a blatant robbery towards the great Manny Pacquiao. So, does anybody have any thoughts of how they remember it before we just close out?
I had Horn winning this one. I thought he bullied Pacquiao in this fight, but then again, I don't even remember if I was scoring that. I probably was, but I don't have that scorecard with me. But I thought I had Horn winning. I remember one thing that I didn't like Tim Bradley's antics during that fight. It seemed sort of when Tim Bradley started being a little too much of a company man, in my opinion. This fight, him and Teddy Atlas were just too much, them both being on the call. It was just too much.
Yeah, I watched it at a hotel on a vacation on my phone, so it wasn't like the best. And I remember that too. There's some things that I didn't like that Pacquiao was doing, but from what I saw, I thought Pacquiao did win the fight. But I would love to rewatch that one again.
Dave, what are your memories from this one, man?
Actually, I watched that at a bar, right? And they had to the fight had to be shown at a certain time, right? Because to deal with the Australian feed and coming over here. But I think that Jeff Horn won that fight. I mean, from my memory, I think he upset Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao was not prepared for the type of fighter that Jeff Horn was. He was a bully and whatnot, and it was one of those one-shot deals, right? Where the guy didn't go on to do anything remarkable with the rest of his career. And it makes me wonder constantly whether or not George Kambosos is going to be a one-hit wonder.
Man, great parallels. So we'll take a look at it next week. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. And I also want to thank George from Off the Ropes Boxing and MMA. Dave from the Shoe Shine. You can catch him on Monday nights on the HCP network with his homie Drew Evo, one of my favorite shows. I love going over there, talking to Dave, antagonizing Drew the best I can, even if they no-sell me sometimes. Great show. So I want you guys all to take care, and we'll see you next week.